Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good whenever you have taken the time out of your sweet, special day to join us, AJ Carrion and Ben Weiner, the self-proclaimed, but additionally have held up to the name, not very unlike LeBron James, named himself the king, but he's been the king, the Pylon Dons. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We are very happy to have you here. If this is your first time listening, one more welcome. Doesn't hurt anybody. However, this is a really exciting episode for longtime listeners of the show. But that's a spoiler alert. Let's take a deep breath and let's just talk about how we're doing. AJ, how has your day been, my friend?
It's been good. Work has been busy. That's just how work can be. I've definitely ramped up, which I didn't know I was capable of ramping up the tape I've been watching. I've developed a little personal top 30 Dynasty prospects in this class list, all positions included. Just in case you were curious with how I'm choosing to spend my free time, it's to make sure that in that Superflex league where I have 5 first rounders that I actually don't trip over my own feet and land on my face. So I'm really trying to lock it in. I'm starting to realize this rookie class does have some holes in it, but overall is still a very solid class. And a lot of people don't get enough love. We won't get too off topic because if we start talking about the rookies, Ben and I will actually 3 hours later be arguing about somebody in the second round.
You think that Ahmed Smith is better than Tyler Allgeier? I swear to God.
Yeah, you couldn't have put it better than that hypothetical. But I mean, other than that, I've been doing pretty well. I'm super excited for today's episode. You kind of were starting to tease at what the topic is, but how are you doing?
Dude, I'm doing good. So I this past Christmas, my girl got me an air fryer. Unbelievable. And I have recently been making healthy Chick-fil-A sandwiches. For those of you who know me, I'm very into counting every little calorie like it's a fantasy point. I love hitting my protein goals. And I air fry these chicken cutlets, dip them in egg whites. I'm not too overzealous with the breadcrumbs. Well, olive oil spray for good measure. Toss that sucker in there at 380 for about 15 minutes. Little flip. Splash of Chick-fil-A sauce, some low-cal bread. You're cooking with gas.
That sounds good. I would mess one of those up right now for sure.
Bro, come over anytime. I'll chef you up, you know. But as I was saying, and I know before we get back to what I was saying, don't forget to follow us on all forms of social media at Ben the Pylon Don, at AJ the Pylon Don, at the Pylon Dons on Twitter, and at the Pylon Dons on Instagram, excuse me, and at Pylon Dons on Twitter. Multiple forms of social media. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Okay, and now we have the transition. If you are with us on YouTube today, you have been staring at this colorful draft board that has been pre-drafted about a year ago now. This was drafted by 10 of our closest and most devoted listeners, AJ and myself. This was a Dynasty startup mock draft. It was one of our first 10 episodes, our first time being content creators. And we've came back and we're going to see how it looks a whole year later. AJ, are you fired up?
I'm absolutely fired up. There's so much on this board that if you showed somebody in 2022 where people were getting taken, even a lot of these guys in the middle round, people would be so dumbfounded at what they're looking at. I mean, for one, you've got Corey Davis over Elijah Moore in a dynasty. That was a real-ish thing when we saw Corey Davis's contract, but that's just one of so many picks that we're going to get into. I won't dilly-dally dissecting the board for much too longer. We do want to thank our participants, Eric, BJ Drew, Max Kushner, Matt, Ethan, Connor Coggins, who you guys met on the Commissioner episode. Go check it out if you have not. Glenny, Mechanic, and Ben's great brother, Ari, you guys, some of you killed it. I'm not going to say you all killed it because that would be too nice, but we're going to break down some of the best picks and some of our favorite selections throughout this draft, as well as how we did and what we learned looking back almost a full year later.
And because we're total narcissists, we're going to start with our own teams. So to get things started, we're going to run through for the overall format, our best and worst picks all of our aforementioned listeners' best and worst picks. And then we're going to break down who has the best team and a couple lessons we learned. Should be a 35-40-minute spiritual journey about fantasy football and about how fantasy giveth and fantasy taketh. I think the biggest upgrade to us really working in on our YouTube people, again with the narcissism, is that people can see all these hand gestures I do as I podcast.
You are very much a hand gesture talker. I think I am not as much when we record, just because I don't know, I never really got too animated when we recorded. But now I'm trying to do it. If you're looking on YouTube, hello, you can see me waving.
Hello, we're on YouTube. Don't look at my armpits. Okay, so now let's get into it. All jokes aside, AJ, looking at your team, what pick are you the most proud of running this through?
I'm really happy going AJ Dillon at 7-3. I look at pretty much everybody on the board after that selection, and I'm totally confident that that was the best pick humanly possible with how things panned out in Green Bay. Obviously, a year ago, I didn't really know how things were going to pan out, but Aaron Jones was in his 26-year-old season after receiving the contract extension. The history there tends to be that running backs get used slightly less and less throughout their secondary large contract, especially star RBs who have had a little bit of injuries here and there like Aaron Jones has had. And AJ Dillon is a legit talent, and he proved that tenfold this year. So I was really content looking back to see that I snagged him at the 7-3, so top of the 7th round. Yeah, that's definitely one of the few good picks I made. If you're looking at the draft board, you're probably wondering where I was trying to go with this team. I called my shot on a lot of guys. A few of them got hurt. A few of them didn't get to play. That's the nature of fantasy football. But AJ Dillon was truly probably the best pick by a significant margin that I made.
I would agree. And also, I'm a huge AJ Dillon fan. I have him across, I think, every one of my Dynasty leagues, actually. There's only one league where I don't have AJ Dillon in. So I'm very well invested. He's an awesome talent, and he's probably going to be really good for the Green Bay Packers, regardless of who their quarterback is next year. Keeping things moving to my best pick was none other than, I believe, the running back 2 overall. I did not check this stat before I said this. Austin Eckler at the 310. Bellissimo, he says, because that was just beautiful. I was really hoping to get Austin Eckler there. And it's funny, I was drafting at the 110 because that's where I thought that was where I wanted to draft over the course of the year. And the entire time in all of my drafts where I was picking around this spot, I always wanted Austin Eckler at the 310. Unfortunately, that didn't work out for me pretty much anywhere because as we got closer to the season, people started to realize what I was seeing way back when we did this mock draft, and then Austin Eckler was going to be really, really good. So a little right there, a little pat on the back. Hope the mic picked that up. And yeah, so AJ, is there another pick you'd like to brag about really quickly? Because that doesn't require too much analysis.
Another one of your guys. And again, like I said, I had very few good picks. I will proudly state that on this podcast. We drafted this, I want to say it was in April or May almost. And so we really didn't have the clearest image of what some of these situations looked like. Unfortunately, I bought in on a few guys that totally flopped, but Christian Kirk in the 13th round, again, another young stud, another guy that you were high on coming into the season.
It's what friends are for. It's what friends are for. Like, dude, no problem. Anytime you need a sleeper, I got you.
I almost thought about putting Kyler Murray in here at 410, but I did take him as the QB2 off the board. And when you look at Josh Allen going at the 6-2, that definitely can't be your second best pick. So I'm deciding to go with one of the lower end guys that, again, I mean, I don't want to get too much into Christian Kirk, but with DeAndre Hopkins sort of waning off towards the end of the season, Cliff Kingsbury seems really comfortable calling plays for Christian Kirk, and I don't think that's going to change coming into this year. They've invested a good amount on offense. I think they're going to try and keep this running back tandem together for another year. Maybe they'll see some personnel changes. I mean, they'll definitely see some in the secondary because that was arguably their weakest position. But that's going to be their main focus, and I don't know if they're going to have the luxury to invest heavily in the wide receiver position, which spells great things for Christian Kirk.
Absolutely. He's very talented. I concur. One of my best picks, and this is a tough one because I think looking at my team, I have a lot of okay picks. Like most of these picks are pretty fine. There's not like a crazy steal, and there isn't well, there's one major bust which we'll get to, and I'm pretty mad that I took that bust, but we're not at bust yet. We're not at busts. I took T. Higgins at the 5'10. And it's interesting that I'm really proud of this pick because I took him right before Jalen Waddle and Cooper Kupp. And you'd think that I'd be sitting there kicking myself, being like, idiot, how didn't you see it? Elite rookie receiver or the dynasty or the overall wide receiver one, excuse me. So you'd think I'd be kicking myself, but I'm not, because one thing that we've discussed, and we'll discuss later in the episode as well, is lump receivers and the production tiers that we see there. And my strategy of going running back, tight end, and then receiver, taking a young guy in the top 26, 27, who I thought really had a chance to pan out, he did. My process held true, where if I waited till the 5th round to draft a receiver and took T. Higgins, that worked out well for me. So while that could have been even better with Jalen Waddle or Cooper Kupp, I'm proud of my process and I'm content with the result.
Yeah, I can't hate the result either. I mean, I've definitely turned over a leaf on T. Higgins. I was very out on him to start the season. He started the season super slow, and then he completely turned it into high gear. Now the Bengals are knocking on the door of a championship, partially because of it. So, yeah, I love the pick. I think he could be one of those guys that is in the top 16 and flirts with the top 10 pretty much every year for the next few years. That's the type of guy that he plays out like. He's super reliable, super high upside depending on the matchup, and overall just a very, very talented player. So yeah, those two picks,
the process worked.
Those
there.
are the ones. Yeah, 100%. We'll go into the process of how we were drafting and what we learned a little bit later. But let's go to the rest of the board because there's a lot of really interesting selections here. Again, we did this before training camp, before any preseason injuries, hence J.K. Dobbins in the top 10, hence guys like Cam Akers. Is he on this board or am I? Yeah, Cam Akers at the 2-5. Sorry, I lost myself there for a second.
So for context, also, this episode released on May 11th. So after the NFL draft, we knew landing spots, but there was a whole lot of things going on.
Yeah, there was a lot up in the air for sure. And a lot of these draft capital players, like a lot of their values that you're looking at, drastically did change for better or for worse as we got towards the start of the season. I want to just get right into my favorite pick though, if you don't mind.
Yeah, is it someone else's favorite pick?
Yeah, it's somebody else's selection. I want to give a humongous shout out to Eric for taking Jamar Chase at the 301. I saw Jamar Chase even as late as mid-August, going in the middle of the 3rd round, going
later, 5th round, right before the season.
Going, yeah, right after preseason games, going in the top of the 5th, late 4th, because of the drops issue that clearly has not proven to be much of an issue at all. But that type of selection right there is one that I knew Eric made with his gut because he did go get him in redraft as well. And hats off to Eric because Jamar Chase, if you made it to the championship game, more than likely won you a championship and is now being drafted as a top 5 dynasty asset. So shout out to Eric. Elite selection, way to stick to your guns and go get the guy based off what you saw and what you like. So it clearly worked out in this draft, pairing him with CeeDee Lamb at the turn. Obviously, Christian McCaffrey didn't work out perfectly, but if this was a real dynasty roster with those 3 receivers and Mark Andrews, you'd be sitting very pretty right now.
That running back 2 spot would be pretty ugly, though, for Eric, so we can't give him too much credit. Additionally, I'd like to toss a shout out to my younger brother, Ari, who's abroad in Florence right now, for taking Cooper Kupp at the 512, because that's where he was going. And Ari did not get too cute with it. He didn't consider Robert Woods. It's pretty funny that he went Cooper Kupp and Julio Jones at the turn. I doubt that Ari was the only person at the 112 spot in all of fantasy who went Cooper Kupp and Julio Jones, because those two probably averaged out to like a low end wide receiver too. But well done, Ari, on snagging the wide receiver one at the back of the 5th round.
Yeah, job well done. Nothing else really needs to be said regarding that pick. I mean, you know what Cooper Kupp did. It's It's pretty obvious that that's a killer selection.
If you want to hear a freezing cold take, go back and listen to the original episode, and you'll hear me say something that I will not be repeating on air about Cooper Kupp today.
I'll spoiler alert, it's not the best take of all time, to put it lightly. It definitely is gonna come to bite you in the butt. If you go listen, you gotta add us on Twitter because it'll give you a good laugh.
It's funny.
Forward though, it is funny. Moving forward though, we've got Elijah Mitchell at the 13-8.
Beautiful. Well done. Great job.
Coggins.
Awesome.
And it completely outweighs taking Trey Sermon at the 6-5, which I almost put as my least favorite pick. But I cut him some slack because he sort of paired those two together, snagged the guy in the later round. So he ended up getting that young San Francisco running back that worked out in his favor. And Elijah Mitchell, I mean, we'll discuss Elijah Mitchell another day because he is not necessarily a locked and loaded anything. And that's my current take. But
hater behavior.
We'll save this for the arena. We'll save this for the arena.
Yes, we will.
We'll save this for the arena.
We will be saving Elijah Mitchell for the argument arena.
Put a pin in that, listeners. I'm putting it on my very bare wall behind me. If you're watching on YouTube, I'm pinning that Elijah Mitchell argument arena for this offseason.
Bad take, bad pun. Boo.
But I love the pick, and it clearly worked out in terms of pure value. You probably have what you're looking at as one of, if not the single best year-to-year jump on the entire draft board, which is value pretty much in itself. So great selection by Coggins there for sure.
Yeah, and I'm going to toss another shout out to Matthew Lindsay for taking Kyle Pitts at the 4-7. As people know, I have not been very big on Kyle Pitts last season. And as we've discussed, and we don't need to relapse again and rehash that was true for last season, but now this is now. And Kyle Pitts looks really good right now, and he should be an elite tight end as soon as next season. And getting that kind of value in the 4th round after starting off with 2 running backs and what should have been a rock solid wide receiver 1, like Matthew positioned himself to be in a place where he could kind of wait on a tight end. And that like he had enough strengths at running back and receiver ideally, where that he almost afforded himself that year to wait on Kyle Pitts. So really good timing for him to take that guy. Kyle Pitts is the 5th tight end off the board after Kittle, Kelsey, Waller, and Hawkinson, which sounds about right at the time. So I thought it was a really great pick as well. Those are the last nice things we're going to say for about 15 minutes. Now we're going to be really self-deprecating and bully our friends on air. So buckle up.
Oh yeah, here we go. This is the nitty gritty. My worst pick was Alvin Kamara.
If only there was someone who could have told you that Alvin Kamara wasn't gonna. Was I on that take by then? I may not have been actually.
Yeah, I was on that. I had him finishing closer to the widers, running back 1 than running back 6, and you had him finishing closer to 12 than 6. He finished right around that 6-ish mark. I think he was 8 overall, but 6th in points per game. And so the pick isn't bad in the context of what he was able to do this year. Obviously, with the ongoing investigation into the current news regarding Alvin Kamara, we are not going to try and play detective. We are going to try and play fantasy football analyst. So we are going to discuss Kamara as if he is suiting up for the New Orleans Saints week 1 of 2022.
And we don't know who his head coach would be for week 1 of 2022. We don't know who his head
coach would be. So that's one doc. He's hit that age threshold where running backs start to sort of wean off or become less workhorse-esque. And he's really been a workhorse. I know he doesn't necessarily get 260 carries every year, but those 80+ receptions that he's almost locked in for every year, those are not just empty snaps. Like those will weigh on a running back as well, especially when you're playing a full 16 games. He missed around 4 this year. Could it be a sign of things to come? Maybe. And he didn't win you any leagues. And that's really what it comes down to. When you're taking a guy in the top 5, top 6 in a dynasty draft, and he's not absurdly young or a receiver, if it's an older running back, you're pretty much poising that team for that 2-year window with that running back. And that's sort of what I learned, because throughout this draft, I think I got a little bit too cute. I did go a little bit running back heavy to sort of prep for the afterlife of Alvin Kamara. But what that did was leave me shorthanded elsewhere. So all in all, in terms of the way I was basically forced to structure my team, shout out to all these guys. They had great drafts, but it put me in an awkward position where I wasn't really confident in my final product. And even with Alvin Kamara missing, like especially with Alvin Kamara missing time, this was not necessarily a locked and loaded playoff roster.
Yeah, I would have to agree with you that the Kamara pick did you no favors for sure. I do think that your Kittle at the back end of the second was pretty solid, though, which I hope makes up for that a little, at least morally. But it makes you feel better. I missed on a running back too. And I'm really mad about it because I didn't take Clyde anywhere across all of my leagues. I was in on DeAndre Swift over him at ADP. This was more when they were both in like the third round, which was pretty crazy. But I took Clyde Edwards-Helaire, to be frank, because I thought it'd be really cool if when we did this episode a year from now, that I had a top 6 running back on my roster. Because that was the upside at the time. But now we know that Clyde Edwards-Helaire is bad. And his best ball ADP is now in the 7th round, which is like an Eddie Curry-esque fall off for any of our basketball fans.
You're pretty much taking him where you're taking Kareem Hunt in best ball.
I think I'd prefer
higher,
Kareem Hunt.
But
I think I would prefer Kareem Hunt.
That's the context we're providing. So just to put in perspective,
I think you're taking him behind AJ Dillon in best ball.
Yes, you are.
That's the real.
I mean, once we saw Jerick McKinnon getting snaps, I think that was almost the proverbial nail in the coffin for Clyde Edwards-Helaire. And looking at your draft board, you said yourself there was a lot of okay picks. There's not a lot of bad picks here.
This is a bad one. Like
Darren Waller. I mean, injuries, an awkward return from injury, some volume issues that I don't think will persist. I still like Darren Waller.
So do I, especially with Josh McDaniels. It's not like McDaniels never coached a good tight end before.
Hey, shh. We're giving a little bit too much sauce now. We're giving a little bit too much sauce. I got to go buy him first. You can't have anybody in cereal.
I've tried already in every league we've played together. You're not getting them.
Hey, it's good to know that we don't disagree on everything. But yeah, that's really the pick that stands out on your roster. I have to agree as well. It's unfortunate because towards the start of the regular season, I was starting to warm up to Clyde at ADP, and clearly I was wrong.
Well, his ADP was falling, to be fair.
Like by the time it was getting to the end of the third round.
It was the back of the third round.
It was like 311, 312.
Exactly.
When you could get a guy with what I believe to be 75 reception upside in 17 weeks, that just felt like it felt like the upside was too tantalizing. And with Andy Reid's history of what he's done with running backs, it felt like it was almost an inevitable that he would actually perform. And then Darrell Williams was better than him while Clyde was out.
And Jerick McKinnon was better than him. Everyone's better than Clyde. They could sign James. they could sign Rojo, and I think I'd rather have Rojo. I'm like,
we'll get to Rojo in a second.
Yes, we will. Yes, we will.
If you're looking at the board, I think sneak preview, you can kind of guess what we're going to say. But Ben, talk about your other worst pick that I don't think is a bad pick, but I understand why you put it here.
Well, so this is a self-deprecating brag because I'm going to talk about how good my process is and how smart I am. But then I'm going to be mad at myself because I didn't listen to myself. Because I really liked Dak Prescott last year, and I still objectively like him again this year, but I've always been a proponent of a late round QB guy. I've always felt that it is not very hard to find a guy in the mid rounds who can give you pretty decent quarterback production on any given week, and I'd rather invest in more valuable positions. And I was right, because I took Joe Burrow 2 rounds later, and that was all I had to do. I didn't need Dak Prescott. If this was a real league, Dak Prescott would not have been starting for me this year over Joe Burrow. He wouldn't have. So that's why it's a bad pick, because right now I took Dak Prescott over, some of these receivers. I took him over Deontay Johnson, and I like Deontay Johnson. I took Dak Prescott over Deontay Johnson. If this team has Deontay Johnson instead of Dak Prescott, this could be a top 3 team in this mock league. But it doesn't, because I had to go after my guy, which you do sometimes, but I should have trusted my gut. I should have taken a receiver at that spot in the 6th round. Simple as it is, especially when I nailed my pick 2 rounds later, a year in advance of the breakout.
Yeah, almost a full year, really.
Wow, that was a scary face I made on YouTube. Oh my God.
I can't disagree with anything you said. There's a couple worse picks I'm looking at though. not to name any names, D. Eskridge.
Still got James Conner.
James Conner was a great pick, but
Thank you,
D.
thank you.
Eskridge was far and away one of the uglier
Jury's
picks
still
of
out
the
on him.
entire
Jury's
draft.
still out on him.
Hey, then I guess I'm the judge because I'm done with him. I'm sentencing him to life on the bench right
You
now.
are not one of his peers. You get no say in the D. Eskridge valuation process.
Fair enough. I mean, looking at my board, there's a few bad picks. I almost went Chenault at the 8-10, but I do think there's so much room for bounce back there. I almost went Chris Carson at the 5-3, but I cut myself a little bit of slack because I think what happened with him and the injury was a little bit unprecedented, and it really sort of triggered an avalanche of falling off that ended up occurring with Chris Carson. So I decided to go with Juju Smith-Schuster. And it's funny because a guy who gets injured for the season being your worst pick doesn't necessarily make sense in a vacuum, but it was his contract year. He had just finished up his rookie contract. He was in free agency. He turned down an offer from the Chiefs, and he signed a 1-year deal, pretty much Big Ben's last ride, yada, yada. Play one more year with him, boost his value after a down year, and go out into free agency with a new outlook. That was my reasoning when I drafted Juju. I thought he had serious possible top 24 receiver upside if Big Ben could actually get the ball downfield. Unfortunately, I mean, he did play decently alongside Deontay Johnson, but even what we saw of him before he got hurt wasn't enough to instill confidence in me that returning from this ACL tear as a free agent, that you can trust this guy. I do have him rostered in a dynasty league that I take very seriously, and I am not really going to move him because
you shouldn't move him. Why would you?
You just kind of have to sit and wait. But when you're looking at the rest of my team, I kind of just have to go with Juju because, I mean, I passed on Deontay Johnson, Rashad Bateman, Michael Pittman.
What about the Chenault pick?
I don't mind the Chenault pick. I do regret picking him over Elijah Moore, of course. I still think there's just too much time with Chenault. We saw him have good flashes as a rookie.
I just traded for Chenault in a league. I think it's maybe a little cheeky. It's maybe like grasping at a couple straws, but I hear you.
Yeah, and I'm just not ready to give up on Chenault yet, but Juju just has so many more hurdles and had the earlier draft capital, so I ended up leaning Juju.
Where did Craig Reynolds go in this draft? Nice. So that's it for the bad things we did. Now we're gonna just ruthlessly unload on our friends. And right when Ethan Gold took Terry McLaurin at the 2-5, I said it was bad. And I just want to remind him, because I know he's listening, because he's a good friend. And he knows that I mean this in a totally good spirit. I told you it was a bad pick, and you didn't listen to me. And a year later, it was a bad pick because Terry McLaurin has never been a wide receiver one. Terry McLaurin will never be a wide receiver one. And if you thought of, you rolled your eyes, but you know I'm right. You rolled your eyes, but you know I'm right.
Bro, if we're buying DJ Moore, you can totally reasonably buy Terry
DJ
McLaurin.
Moore is 3 years younger than Terry McLaurin. Sorry. Nope. Wrong.
All right. Argument Arena. I'm putting another pin for the YouTube watchers.
We have so much good content.
Right, we got Elijah Mitchell up here, and then I'm gonna have like one of those strings you see on like a Find the Serial Killer board, and then it's gonna track to the DJ Moore Terry McLaurin argument.
Like Charlie and It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia in the mailroom.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. You get the gist.
This episode's been like the content giving tree. We have like 3 new episodes.
I mean, we're looking at a board full of players that we drafted with our friends. I was bound to think that a couple of disagreements were gonna come because of it. But yeah, when you look at a pick like McLaurin, Stephon Diggs, Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb, Jamar Chase, Najee Harris, Antonio Gibson, Chris Godwin, even Austin Eckler, Joe Mixon.
I think I don't know.
Javonte Williams. Just to name a few names that went after Terry.
What's kind of funny is the Terry McLaurin pick kind of softens the Clyde Edwards-Helaire blow, because at least Clyde is like has the upside, it's running back, like. You know, makes it hurt a little less bad. So thanks, Ethan. I appreciate it.
I think you'll be surprised where Terry McLaurin's getting drafted when Washington gets a new QB. But we'll see.
When they get Jimmy Garoppolo, it'll just be Terry to the moon. You know,
we'll table this discussion for another day. Keeping it moving with some of our least favorite picks amongst this draft. Denzel Mims, 11-11. As a Jets fan, you have to call it like you see it. That pick is really bad. I'm sorry to Mechanic, who unfortunately
Big Jets fan.
Big Jets fan as well, so I understand the reasoning. I liked Denzel Mims. I owned past tense ED Denzel Mims. I no longer own him anywhere because he tore my heart, stomped it out, and ripped it to shreds. Unfortunately, he just hasn't panned out. The talent and the attitude are just not aligned, and unfortunately, he's on the outside looking in the Jets receiver room that would much rather throw the ball to Braxton Berrios and Corey Davis and Jameson Crowder and Keelan Cole.
Wait. But so I agree with you. It was an atrocious pick. But could we at least respectfully agree that Denzel Mims doesn't belong on the waiver in Dynasty?
How deep are these rosters?
30-man rosters.
Yeah, sure. Yeah,
okay. That's all.
You want to bring up players I've got rostered on some of these things?
No, we don't need to. We don't need to.
Yeah. So a guy like Denzel Mims, you have to keep on your radar just because he did have draft capital.
6'4", had draft capital.
He's only in his third year now.
He's also not a fit for their offense whatsoever. And like once they hired the Saleh regime and they brought in that West Coast style offense, the writing was somewhat on the wall for the 6'4" like jump ball guy. That's just not really what's going on. So I don't know. Like it was a really bad pick, but I don't know, 3-4 years down the line, maybe Denzel Mims gets like Laquan Treadwell was fantasy relevant this year. So, never say never.
I'm tired of hearing about like Laquan Treadwell.
Just trade me.
This is like the fourth time you brought him up in 10 days. I don't even know how you managed to do it.
Anyhow, speaking of other bad picks, I remember vividly, I re-listened to this episode today just to kind of refresh me on like some of the takes going on. And I like exclaimed like retching, like verbal diarrhea when Glenny took Ronald Jones at the 4-4. I knew that wasn't good in the moment. We all knew that wasn't good. This is coming off the year where they drafted Keshawn Vaughn, who was also bad. This was after the Lombardi-Lenny run. This was Rojo just lost his job in front of our eyes. Well, we saw this, and then
we
took him anyway.
And Leonard Fournette is taken at the 10-1, and he helped a lot of people make the playoffs. Another great pick by Ari Weiner, just to highlight how great of a team he put together.
That actually kind of segues because we had one more really bad pick. My apologies. That does not segue. We are not going anywhere.
Yeah, I'll keep this brief. Miles Sanders at the 3-5. I hated it then, and I despise it now. I told people Miles Sanders had a realistic shot of finishing outside the top 24, and that's exactly what he did.
You did.
Had a few hurdles in front of him. Obviously, his absence from the end zone was just unprecedented. But regardless, you know what you're getting into with Miles Sanders. More so with the Eagles and how they tend to use Miles Sanders, which is the bigger storyline. But at the 3-5, when you're passing on guys like Chris Godwin, Travis Kelce, Austin Eckler, Joe Mixon, David Montgomery, Kyle Pitts, Keenan Allen,
Ronald Jones,
guys like Javonte Williams, Brandon Ayuk, DJ Moore. There's just too much talent. Samuel Higgins, Waddle Cup.
Brandon Cooks like 8 rounds later. Like there was a lot of talent on the board.
I was able to actually draft him in a startup, but that's because he fell to me at the end of the 6th round. And at that point, I was just kind of like, what am I gonna do? Not take Miles Sanders? Like
he's very talented. The issue with Miles Sanders, like Miles Sanders certainly belongs in your Madden 21 franchise. Don't get me wrong. Like elusiveness 93, like speed 90, like he's sick. But as we know, fantasy football, and we say this time and time again, this is an industry. I'm blanking on the word. What's like the word when like a cliche? That is the word I'm looking for. It's an industry cliche that fantasy production is talent and opportunity. Miles Sanders has the talent. He does not get the opportunity. No good. Now going back to that segue that I was going to segue into, and then we stopped because I forgot AJ's turn, and that wasn't very thoughtful of me. So I'm sorry, AJ. We wanted to talk about the best overall team, and that has to go to my brother Ari, who did not miss a pick until the 6th round. And then he missed his 6th and 7th round picks. And then he kind of nailed pretty much the rest of it. Like running through his draft, Tyreek Hill 112, Pat Mahomes 2-1, Joe Mixon 312, David Montgomery 401, Cooper Kupp 512, Julio Jones 6-1, Zach Moss 712, Amon-Ra St. Brown 8-1, Hunter Henry 912, Leonard Fournette 10-1, Jared Goff 11-12, Robert Tonyan 12-1, Kylan Hill 13. I'm squinting really hard. That's 13-12.
Yeah,
Mike
that is
Williams
13-12.
14-1, and Todd Gurley.
Mike Williams, again, I wanted to honorable mention. That's one of the best picks in the draft.
Yeah. That
So I
team
am in
went-
agreement
yeah.
with you that it's Ari, but I do want to give a huge, huge shout out to BJ as well.
I was thinking that too.
For drafting a killer team. Taylor Gibson, Najee Harris at the turn. You were not getting Najee at the 3-2 3 weeks after we did this, but he got him that day. And if you drafted on that day and drafted Najee Harris there, you're very happy with how that turned out.
It's, for context, we did this mock draft in May. AJ and I did a Dynasty startup together. 3 months later in August, I took Najee Harris in the back of the first round, and that was considered to be a winning pick. So just use that in perspective for how great it is that BJ got him at the top of the third round.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, those three running backs, and then I'm still huge on Ayuk. Michael Carter's a fantastic pick. Deontay Johnson and Elijah Moore are also great picks. So all in all, this roster's super balanced. The Trey Lance pick in the 11th round. This is like one of those teams that loses in the divisional round, but you're like, oh, next year they're going to be really scary. And that's exactly what BJ assembled. I mean, I think one of the more well-rounded rosters I've looked at. The youth at both positions is huge. So far and away, I think those two pretty much cement themselves within the top three, no doubt about it.
Before we talk about what we learned, I'd also like to throw some total shade. Now that people know who Coggins is, I love Coggins. He's great, but his team kind of sucks, and it makes me really friggin' happy. Like, holy moly. Like Trey Sermon, Rondale Moore, Cortland Sutton, Robbie Anderson, Irv Smith. Yuck. Holy crap.
I'll cut him some slack.
No slack. No slack.
I'll cut him a little bit of slack.
He's a really good player, so we don't get this opportunity often. Michael Thomas in the third round. This team is a nightmare, bro.
Hey, Adams, Akers, Javonte Williams, Devonta Smith, Freiermuth, and Mitchell. You're working with something there. There's something.
But Coggins is really good. So by Coggins standards, this will be atrocious.
Yeah, I mean, when he watches this, he's gonna look back and text me and be like, "Bro, you should have blurred my name out."
Yeah, and then you're gonna tell him you wanted to, and then I said that we would actually talk about it on air with his team in detail.
Totally.
Yeah, big time. So now just a couple thoughts as we wrap up. AJ, do you want to just any lessons, any big takeaways? Because this was a hard draft for you and I included.
So we pretty much have the same bullet points. I'm just going to run through my perspective, and then you can run through yours. And we'll
Sounds good.
Drafting early is really hard. You're
really
forced to pick within the top 5, not only a guy that you have as your cornerstone to potentially win a championship the year you do the startup draft, but it's got to be a cornerstone that you think has that 2 to 3 year window that we try to play dynasty football in. Because I went Alvin Kamara, I limited myself more to a 1 to 2 year window, and going a lot of different directions in the middle rounds really ended up hurting me. And that sort of brings me to my next point, where you should be taking shots on guys who are high floor, low ceiling, or sorry, low floor, high ceiling. I totally botched that.
High floor, high ceiling.
So you should be taking shots on low floor, high ceiling receivers in the middle rounds, but you have to mix those in with your safer options. And that's really what ended up biting me in the behind. From round 5 through round 12, I went 5 running backs and 3 receivers. And I say maybe 2 of these running backs, maybe 3 if I'm really feeling generous, are really going to potentially be startable, whether that be in the flex or a running back spot. And startable is even pushing it because it might be another year for a guy like Ramondre, who I took in the 11th round. We don't know if Singletary is going to be the guy next year. So these are guys.
You won't be. Put it on the wall. Put it on the wall. That's our third episode right there. Thanks. Elijah Mitchell argument arena, Terry McLaurin, DJ Moore argument arena. Buffalo Bills are taking a running back. 3 things for all of you to look forward to.
So when you look at my team, it just shows like a true lack of direction. I mean, Chenault, Ramondre Stevenson, Christian Kirk, AJ Dillon is one whole direction, and then Chris Carson, Juju, Tyler Boyd, Singletary, Latavius Murray is a whole other direction. Obviously, the Calvin Ridley pick, you can't really predict when things like that occur, so that does put a sort of salt on the wound, for lack of a better term. I was fine with George Kittle, but all in all, what I learned from this is don't shy away from second and third year guys that have a chance to improve. Just because they were middle of the pack or the part of that quote unquote lump doesn't mean they don't have room to grow. That was a major mistake that I made. I mean, we saw guys like T. Higgins, Jalen Waddle, just to name a couple, Deontay Johnson, and a guy who I didn't dislike. I didn't dislike Deontay Johnson, but a guy that just shouldn't have been there at 7-2 by any means. And I can't believe I took Juju over him. It's actually hurting my eyeballs right now.
Yeah.
All in all, even guys like Michael Pittman, and there's Elijah Moore as a rookie. I don't think I took one rookie, and it was Ramondre Stevenson. So I would have definitely bit more into this rookie class if I could redo this. Of course, I mean, hindsight's 2020. I did think Chris Carson was going to be good for redraft. That really obviously did not pan out either. And it's just one of those teams where you're just like, all right, GG. We go next. We learned. We pushed through. And I'm glad I got to look back on it a full year later after having done so many leagues for the first time with a lot more knowledge in my back pocket for the next time.
Absolutely. And also, before I give my reflections, Ethan Gold also tossed me a shout. He reminded me to do this episode as well. He's like, hey, man, like, send me a picture of the board. So shout out to Ethan, just so he's not super mad about his really bad Terry McLaurin pick. So now a couple of things that I want to take away. I'm not too concerned with my overall roster, to be frank. I did take 3 rookies, D. Eskridge, Larry Roundtree, and Amir Smith-Marset, 0 for 3. Call me Grant Williams from 2 years ago. I don't know what's with the basketball references today, but anyhow, if there's any takeaway looking at this board, it's that you need to take shots on lump wide receivers. That is like the really big takeaway. If you look at this draft and you could have all the receivers drafted in the 4th round and up or the 4th round and down, I know there's more on the down, but I'm taking the fourth round and down probably every time.
Yeah. You have to.
Like, think about this. Sure, like Jamar Chase, CeeDee Lamb, and Stephon Diggs and Justin Jefferson went in the first couple rounds. That's great, but do you know who went in the later rounds?
Everybody.
Moore, Cooper Kupp, T. Higgins, Jalen Waddle, Michael Pittman, Ty Lockett, Adam Thielen gave you a good year. Like, there's just names.
Deebo Samuel, Deontay Johnson,
Brandon Ayuk went lower. There's guys in these middle rounds where if you actually put the time in and research these guys and learn, and you have a gut feeling backed by statistics about a guy, if you watch him and think he's good, and then you read about him and that tells you that you think you're right, and he's in the 5th round, then you got to go take him there. Well, look at this. This is how to be good at fantasy football 101.
Yeah, but just blur out my roster when you're looking at the how to be good part, because this is an atrocity that I put
Fantasy
together.
Football 202. Blur out AJ's roster. But that's my really big takeaway here is take the stud running back early. And early in running backs are tricky. Yes, they get hurt. Like, there's no foolproof, perfect way to be good at this. But there's one thing that's for sure, and it's that mid-range to low-range wide receivers hit. And they hit often. The NFL is a passing league. Teams play 3 wide receiver sets. If you think a team's number 2 receiver is every bit as good as his number 1 guy, then you should take that number 2 every single draft you're in. That's the lesson.
Yeah, totally. And if you think an offense is going to be absolutely killer, buy into that offense. When I look at my team at the end of the day, I bought into a lot of offenses that did not pan out. Jacksonville, awful. Pittsburgh, pretty bad. Seattle, awful. Atlanta, pretty bad. San Francisco with Kittle, I mean, he was hurt. New Orleans, pretty bad. All in all, that ended up biting me in the behind pretty hard as well. You the way you score points is by getting into the end zone. I get we play PPR and some people play tight end premium and all those receptions are
I don't
awesome.
like tight end premium. Hot
And-
take. I don't like it. It's a total flavor.
If you're watching
it's
on
a
YouTube,
flavor thing. It's a flavor thing.
It's number 4 on the board. It's definitely
it's a
in
preference
priority.
thing. It's a preference thing.
Yeah,
I just don't enjoy it as much.
That's
Sue
fair.
me.
That's fair.
Sue
We'll
me.
talk about
I didn't say it
We'll
was
talk
stupid. I said I don't like it. That's different.
All right. But at the end of the day, you got to get in the end zone. Your team has to be taking shots at the end zone. You got to be getting big gain looks because those big plays, they impact the NFL game and they equally impact your fantasy game. A 47-yard touchdown reception changes your entire week. I was drafting a lot of guys that didn't really have the capability of doing that. And that's what really hurt me at the end of the day. So don't be afraid to call your shot. Like Ben said, if you see a guy sitting there, I was thinking, oh, Juju will get me 93 receptions for maybe 950 yards and he'll be a very solid wide receiver too. And I didn't call my shot and it hurt me. And I'm glad now because I'm much more comfortable drafting a full year later, calling my shot on my guys. So
Yeah, we're
if you're
absolutely
not mock drafting at the end of the day and you're really, really into this, you're doing yourself a disservice, in my opinion. And I think Ben will back that tenfold. And that's definitely looking at this and then looking how I will draft now. I'm so much more comfortable than I was even a year ago when we started this podcast.
So I will say this, and this is not a brag. AJ knows this, and he will nod yes on the YouTube. I have never met an individual who mock drafts more than me.
No.
Like just straight up. Like it's just as simple as it is. Like it's kind of like how AJ says for one last basketball reference of the day. He's like, if you're into this and you're not mock drafting, that's like saying you want to go to the NBA and like you hoop like once a week. Like you don't want it that bad. And that's okay. It's a game. It's supposed to be for fun. You're allowed to be a casual fantasy football player. However, we do assume our audience listening to this in February is probably not the casual fantasy football player.
Yeah, they're not just playing in an office league. I'll tell you that much.
That's for sure. Even though I want to win my office league too. But anyhow, so just a couple things on the docket. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. I have no other major parting shots aside from the fact that I've been on Joe Burrow before you. And we have some really big stuff coming up. We have a huge guest next week. We're really, really excited about it. The Super Bowl is next week, so that's going to be really exciting in its own right. AJ, we also disagree on this. You could put our fifth argument arena because AJ has
It's
one
not even
team
an
and I have
argument.
another.
The Rams are just the better team. I hate to break it to you. We'll see you. We'll see you on Sunday.
My name is Ben Weiner.
I'm AJ. Enjoy the Super Bowl, guys. Make sure you tune in for next episode.